Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Ben, and welcome to Bathroom Brews, the deck series where I take a crappy deck idea and make it into a deck that you won't want to flush away. On this week's episode, I'll be talking about landocrats. I'm going to take my lands, I'm going to turn those into creatures, and I'll be sacrificing those. The commander I chose for this strategy is none other than the Gitrog monster. The Gitrog monster is a 5 mana, 3 generic, 1 black, 1 green, for a 6/6 with Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog monster unless you sacrifice a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. There are 2 reasons why I chose the Gitrog monster to be the commander of this deck. 1 is it's one of my favorite commanders in the format, and 2 are the last 2 abilities. Being able to play additional lands on each of your turns means you won't fall as far behind when sacrificing lands from the battlefield, and the second ability is it's a card draw engine in the command zone, because when we sacrifice our lands, if the Gitrog monster's out, we get to draw cards. Before we get into the deck tech, let's talk about the stats. First, the budget. I tried to keep the deck under $500 at the time of recording, and it came into about $489. For the rest of the stats, there's 4 sources of card draw, 13 ramp, 4 extra lands, 4 landfall, 11 landimate or land animation cards, 1 haste enabler, 3 protection spells, 5 drain effects, 6 sack outlets, 5 land recursion, 3 removal, 4 tutors, 3 of those being land tutors and the other one being a generic, and then 2 value cards. These are cards that don't fit into any of the categories, but are key to the deck either as a value engine or as a combo enabler or combo piece. And then finally, 37 lands in the deck. And without further ado, let's get into the deck tech. So first, our 4 card draw spells. We have Greater Good, Skull Clamp, Midnight Reaper, and Grim Horspex. The goal with these was to have repeatable card draw outlets that weren't just one-time effects, such as Village Rites or Deadly Dispute. Next will be our staple ramp. This is ramp that just is good, but doesn't necessarily synergize with our deck. We have Nature's Lore, Wood Elves, and 3 Visits, which lets us search our library for a forest card and then put it onto the battlefield. We have Soccer Tribe Elder, Rampant Growth, Grow from the Ashes, Cultivate, and Kodama's Reach, which let us search up basics. Then, for the more thematic ramp, we have Edge of Autumn, which lets us search for a basic if we have 4 or fewer basics. However, it has cycling, sacrifice a land, which means with the Gitrog monster out, we sacrifice a land to pay for the cycling cost, and we draw a card, and then we cycle this, and we draw an additional card. Emergent Sequence is a ramp card that puts counters on our land and makes it into a creature that we can then sacrifice. Harrow, Springboom Druid, and Roiling Regrowth all require us to sacrifice a land to search up 2 basic land cards. Harrow puts them onto the battlefield untapped, Springboom Druid and Roiling Regrowth put them onto the battlefield tapped. The next section is Extra Lands. These are cards that let us play additional lands on each of our turns, or sometimes during our opponent's turn. Dryad of Elysian Growth, Burgeoning, Oracle of Moldiah, and Exploration. Dryad's really good here because it makes all of our lands every basic land type in addition to other types, which you'll see very shortly, comes in handy. And then Oracle of Moldiah, we play with the top card of our library revealed, and we may play lands from the top of our library. This means we can keep our hand full of extra lands if we need to, and we can just play them off the top, which is essentially drawing a card. The next section is Landfall. These are cards that whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get a benefit. Embodiment of Insight, Scoot Swarm, Retreat to Hagra, and Scrib Nibblers. Embodiment animates our lands when they come into play, which lets us sacrifice them. Scoot Swarm, Retreat to Hagra, and Scrib Nibblers are payoff for an infinite combo we have in the deck, which we'll get to towards the end of the video. The next section is Landimate. These are the cards that let us animate our lands and turn them into creatures. We have Verdant Touch, Kamal Fist of Krosa, Emergent Sequence, Embodiment of Insight, Genju of the Fens, Genju of the Cedars, Nissa of Shadowed Bows, Waker of the Wilds, and Nissa Who Shakes the World. The next land animation spells are the 2 best in the deck and are what combo with Dryad of the Elysian Grove. We have Living Lands and Life and Limb. Living Lands is a 4-mana enchantment that says all forests are 1/1 creatures that are still lands. Life and Limbs, a 4-mana enchantment that says all forests and all saplings are 1/1 green sapling creatures and forest lands in addition to their other types. A notable downside to having our lands become creatures or enter as creatures is they're still affected by summoning sickness, which means we can't tap them to add mana. However, there is a way around that. The first option is we play a card like Concordant Crossroads, which gives all creatures haste, but that also affects our opponents, and we don't want our opponents to get benefit. So the next best card is 1,000 Year Elixir. It's a 3-mana artifact that says, you may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. Our land creatures technically have an ability that's tap and add a mana of whatever land type they are, and because that's an ability, 1,000 Year Elixir lets us tap our land creatures on the turn they come out. Another weakness of turning all of our lands into creatures is they'll die to board wipes. So we're running Heroic Intervention, which says permanents we control gain indestructible and hexproof until end of turn for 2 mana. Timber Protector, which is a 5-mana creature that says other treefolk creatures you control get +1/+1, and other treefolk and forest you control are indestructible. We are a graveyard deck, which means Leyline of the Void, Rest in Peace, Tormod's Crypt, Bojuka Bog really hurt us. And to avoid something like that, I put in Blessed Respite. It's a 2-mana instant that says target player shuffles their graveyard into their library, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. It prevents us from taking damage, and if our graveyard is about to get exiled, we can shuffle it back into our deck and not lose a thing. We've talked about how to turn our lands into creatures, how to get extra lands out, but now let's talk about the payoffs. First are the drains. These are cards that whenever a creature we control dies, each opponent or target opponent will lose 1 life and will gain 1 life. The drain effect cards are Falconwrath Noble, Bastion of Remembrance, Zulaport Cutthroat, Poison Tip Archer, and Blood Artist. And with the infinite combo that'll be mentioned later on, we should be able to win the game with any one of these effects out and that combo. Next are Sacrifice Outlets. These are cards that let us sacrifice either creatures or lands to get a benefit. Zurin Orb, Ashnod's Altar, Altar of Dementia, Viscera Seer, Greater Good, and Squandered Resources. Zurin Orb and Squandered Resources let us sacrifice lands even if they're not creatures. We have the Gitrog monster out, but no way to animate our lands. We can still sacrifice them to draw cards. Next is Land Recursion. Like I said earlier, if we get board wiped, we're going to want to be able to play lands from the graveyard, or as we sacrifice them, we'll need ways of getting them back. Ancient Green Warden, Crucible of Worlds, and Ramanov Excavator let us play land cards from our graveyard. Life from the Loam lets us return up to 3 target land cards from our graveyard to our hand, and it has Dredge 3. And then Splendid Reclamation, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. We need a way of dealing with problematic permanents such as Leyline of the Void. So we have Beast Within, Assassin's Trophy, and Terra Sunder. We're a very proactive deck, so I went a little bit lighter on the interaction. If you'd like, you can always make some cuts and add a little bit more. For the tutors, this is important because there are certain lands, which we'll get to later on in the video, that we'll want to tutor up. So we have Scape Shift, Diabolic Intent, Crop Rotation, and Elvish Reclaimer. Scape Shift can also be a combo piece. If we have a Blood Artist effect out, and all our lands are creatures, and we Scape Shift, and we sacrifice 10 lands and get 10 more, target opponent or each opponent will lose 10 life and will gain 10 life. And the next section are the value cards. Again, these are cards that didn't quite fit the theme of the deck, but I wanted to include. The first one is Eudora Gravegardener, and the second is Abundance. Let's talk combos. The first is Yavimaya of Cradled Growth, or Dryad of Elysian Grove, partnered with Life and Limb, or Living Lands. Because these enchantments require our lands to be forests, in order to be 1/1 creatures, we need Dryad or Yavimaya in order to make all of our lands into forests. Yavimaya Cradle of Growth has the upside of making our opponent's lands also into forests, meaning their lands will be vulnerable to board wipes and removal with these enchantments out, which means, hopefully, they won't be board wiping. Now, the next combo in the deck might be a little confusing, so bear with me. It's using Eudora the Gravegardener. It's a 5-mana 5/5 creature that says, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may return it to the battlefield face down under its owner's control. It's a forest land. If we have Life and Limb or Living Lands out, which makes all of our forests into 1/1s, that means Eudora, whenever a creature dies, will bring that creature back face down as a forest that then becomes a 1/1 creature. If we have a sack outlet, such as Ashnod's Altar or Altar of Dementia, we can infinitely sack this creature because Eudora will see a non-token creature dying. It'll bring it back face down as a land, which will become a creature, and we do this over and over again. Some of the payoffs include Retreat to Hagra, which means we'll drain each opponent for infinite amount of life. Scrib Nibblers will exile all of our opponent's library. Scoot Swarm will make an infinite number of 1/1s that we can then attack with. Using Altar of Dementia, we can infinitely mill our opponents. If we have Greater Good out, it'll let us draw through our entire deck. which means we'll be able to find one of the Blood Artist effects that lets us win the game. And with that, thanks for watching. If you'd like to see a budget version of the deck, leave a comment down below. A full deck list will be posted in the description. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and ring that bell to know when all my videos go live. And remember, always wash your hands.